The following podcast reflects our personal opinions and interpretations of publicly available information and should not be construed as factual assertions or legal advice. While we aim to provide accurate commentary, this discussion is speculative in nature and intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. We have taken care to conduct thorough research and carefully investigate the information discussed to ensure accuracy where possible. But we acknowledge that we may not have access to all the facts. As freelance producers, our views are entirely our own and do not represent or reflect the positions of any individuals or entities mentioned in this discussion. Any references to individuals, organizations, or events are made in good faith based on public available sources. We expressly disclaim any intent to harm reputations or imply unlawful conduct by any party. And with that said, let's get into it. Hey y'all, Lauren here, TV producer by day, reality junkie by night, and your guide to the galaxy of shows you love to hate, hate to love, and live to bitch about. This is Reality Bites, the podcast where we deep dive into the week's buzziest reality TV and pop culture happenings.
I'm Morgan. By night, I'm Lauren's co-host and other better half. And by day, I moonlight as an executive producer. I've been around the Bravo block enough to know, let's just say, where the bodies are buried.
We'll take you through the biggest and best water cooler moments of the week through a producer's lens you won't find anywhere else.
Buckle up, buttercups.
I've had enough of you, you beast.
Beast? How dare you?
This is Reality Bites.
Hey y'all, I'm Morgan, executive producer, industry insider, and the person legally obligated to remind you that Hollywood's a Shark Tank wearing a really good PR team. Now, if you're wondering where Lauren is, don't panic. She hasn't been kidnapped by a studio exec. Yet. She's buried in a massive investigative report that has nothing to do with this case, but is going to melt your brain when it drops. Seriously, it's huge. But just because she's not narrating these episodes doesn't mean she wasn't all over them. She helped write, produce, and make sure that I didn't say anything that would get us sued. This is our second deep dive into the It Ends With Us legal war. Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, Ryan Reynolds, and a fight so messy, even Hollywood's best screenwriters couldn't have come up with it. Buckle up, guys. Let's dive in. Hollywood runs on contracts. It's the foundation of power, the currency of control. No contract, no authority. That's the rule. At least, it's supposed to be. But the lawsuit between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni is exposing a dangerous loophole. One that might shift the balance of power in the entertainment industry forever. If Baldoni's allegations hold up, Lively didn't just star in It Ends With Us, she seized control of it. Without a long-form performer contract, without a letter of engagement, and without any agreement personally binding her to the film, she allegedly dictated its PR messaging, controlled major marketing decisions, and made creative demands that brought production to a halt. The question isn't how this happened. The real question is, if a Hollywood A-lister can hijack a production without a contract, what's stopping this from happening again? This isn't just a fight over one film. This case is about leverage, contractual loopholes, and who really holds power in Hollywood. And if studios, producers, and investors aren't paying attention, they should be, because this case is exposing a flaw that could rewrite the industry's playbook. Blake Lively never signed a long-form performance agreement for It Ends With Us. She never signed a letter of engagement. She never put pen to paper on anything that personally bound her to complete the film. And yet, according to Baldoni's lawsuit, she held the production hostage. She controlled PR narratives, dictated creative decisions, and made strategic moves that gave her the upper hand, despite the fact that, legally speaking, she wasn't obligated to do any of it. This shouldn't have been possible, but it was. And it all comes down to one thing: the loan-out agreement. On May 5th, 2023, Lively signed the only contract tied to It Ends With Us, a loan-out agreement between her company, Blakel Inc., and the production company, Wayfarer Studios. Now, this is a common practice in Hollywood. High-profile actors, directors, and creatives quite often sign contracts under their corporations in addition to their personal names. They set up these loan-out companies through which they technically, quote, loan out their services to productions. And they fall under three categories. LLCs protect them from personal risk and are very simple to run, paying taxes like a normal person. There's an S Corp, which I have, which also protects you but can save you money on taxes by splitting income between salary and profits. And then if you're a bigger entity, you usually go for a C corporation, which is a bit more complicated and gets taxed twice. So essentially, these loan out corporations that, as I mentioned, I have as well and are very standard in the industry, they are used as a protection for taxes more often than not. In this case, though, well, it was used for something more. Because it is a smart business move. Loan out agreements provide those advantages, the liability protection even, and a degree of legal separation between the talent and the work. But the catch is a loan out agreement binds the company, not the individual. For me, when I sign on to a show, sure, I sign my loan out agreement, but I also sign a personal contract for my services as an individual. So in this case, it meant that if an actor refused to perform or refused to promote or even walked away entirely, the studio's only recourse would be against the loan out company, not the actor personally. They could sue the business entity, they can withhold payments, but they can't legally force the actor to fulfill their obligations. And that is exactly the loophole that Lively allegedly used to her advantage. Without a separate contract binding her personally, she had all of the influence and none of the accountability. And this is where Sony and Wayfarer should have protected themselves, but didn't despite their efforts. Before filming even began, Lively should have signed an LOE, a letter of engagement, which is a short-form contract that personally locks an actor into a project while the full performer agreement is being negotiated. It isn't uncommon for the long-form agreement to take time to work out, but that's what the safeguard of an LOE is for, to secure the actor with key top-line details in the interim. This document is Hollywood's safety net. It's what ensures an actor can't just walk away mid-project and gives studios the leverage they need to enforce participation. The LOE locks in compensation details, filming schedules, marketing requirements, exclusivity clauses, and most importantly, obligates the actor personally, not just their loan-out company. But Lively never signed it. That meant that she was never legally required to finish filming, never obligated to return for reshoots or ADRs, which are automated dialogue replacements, never bound to do press junkets or promotional appearances, and never locked into Sony and Wayfarer's creative decisions. She could refuse to participate. She could hold out for more demands, and she allegedly used that uncertainty to her advantage. Beyond the LOE, there is one last safeguard: the long-form performer agreement. This is the fully negotiated, legally binding contract that actors sign before stepping onto set, usually, which locks them into production, to reshoots, and to marketing obligations. This is the final contract that ensures the studio has the control it needs. It includes moral clauses that allow them to fire an actor if their behavior damages the film's reputation. It cements final cut authority so the actor doesn't have creative influence over the edit. It requires actors to participate in press appearances, interviews, and social media promotions. But Lively never signed this either. This put her in a gray area where she was able to exert far more creative control than the contract any actor executive producer's contract would ever allow. She wasn't locked into any promotional duties. She could withhold participation, make demands, or walk away entirely without direct legal consequences. For over a year, Blake Lively refused to sign her letter of engagement, perform her contract, or even her union's required SAG-AFTRA start paperwork. Every time Wayfarer pushed, she stalled. Every time a deadline approached, she made more demands. Yet, through it all, she held total control, without a single contract binding her personally to the project. Wayfarer's legal team tried everything. They sent emails, they negotiated, they agreed to her terms. But no matter how many times the paperwork was finalized, she simply never signed. Instead, she used the uncertainty as leverage, demanding power over production, dictating marketing strategy, and even controlling the film's final edit. It started in May 2023. Lively's legal team had already approved her letter of engagement. All she had to do was sign. She didn't. Instead, she redirected the focus, pushing Wayfarer to pay her fee into escrow, despite the lack of a signed agreement. By June, filming was already underway, but with no contract in place. When production was briefly halted due to WGA picketing, Lively left for London to be with her husband Ryan Reynolds. At that point, she had filmed just 16 days of It Ends With Us. Wayfarer's lawyers scrambled. They sent urgent emails reminding her legal team that she still hadn't signed. The response? Silence. By July, patience was running thin. Wayfarer demanded answers. Her letter of engagement had been outstanding for over 2 months. Her SAG-AFTRA start paperwork had never been submitted, and despite receiving payments, she was not legally locked into the project. Yet still, Lively didn't sign. Then in November, the moment the SAG-AFTRA strike ended, Lively's team hit back. Instead of signing their contract, they sent a 17-point list of non-negotiable demands. Some of these demands insinuated unsubstantiated misconduct claims against Baldoni and producer Jamie Heath, claims that had never been made before. The demands? Half were already in place as per industry standards, but made to appear novel and paint Wayfarer in a negligent light. And the message was clear. Comply, or she wouldn't return to set. And since she had no signed contract, walking away would have been a legally viable option. Wayfarer tried to negotiate red lines. They were swiftly denied, and with a half-shot and edited film, and millions already spent and on the line, they signed the conditions as is. Lively resumed filming. Her contract remained unsigned. When production wrapped in February of 2024, she shifted her focus to controlling the edit. She refused to approve marketing materials, stalling Sony's promotional rollout. Then, she demanded more time in the editing room and insisted on hiring her own personal editor and composer. Wayfarer saw their chance. They made an offer, signed the contract, and she could have some extra time. She refused. Instead, she threatened to block the film's trailer release and hinted that she might not secure a Taylor Swift song for the soundtrack unless she got what she wanted. At this point, even Sony executives were in Lively's corner. One marketing executive warned Wayfarer, quote, "You don't want to play ball? You're going to delay and greatly hurt the movie. Good luck," end quote. Under pressure, Wayfarer surrendered. On May 3rd, they gave Lively full creative control over the edit and withdrew their request for her to sign her contract. The priority had shifted. Finish the movie, no matter what it took. And that meant Lively got final cut, removed Baldoni's credit and likeness from promotional materials, took over marketing, and systematically isolated Baldoni from his own film. And by the time It Ends With Us premiered, one question remained. Had Lively ever signed anything? With no mention in either suit, we can't know for sure. But in all likelihood, her letter of engagement, still missing. Her long-form performer contract, never finalized. Her SAG-AFTRA start work agreement, absolutely no record of it. Blake Lively's refusal to sign a contract wasn't just a power play. It was a potential union violation. Under union rules, actors must sign their SAG-AFTRA start work agreements before setting foot on set. This document isn't just a formality. It ensures compliance with union wage protections, working conditions, residual payments, and pension contributions, among many other things. Lively, however, didn't sign hers, at least not since July 5th, 2023, the last we hear of it, which is after Lively had already shot the first phase of the film before the forced hiatus. That's just days before the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike shut down Hollywood. Without a signed agreement, this raised major compliance concerns. Sony and Wayfarer may have violated union rules by allowing her to work without proper documentation. She may not have been covered under union protections, leaving questions about her residuals and benefits. SAG-AFTRA could have intervened, fined the production, or even halted filming until the paperwork was completed. The timing made this even riskier. Any work performed without union documentation during or after the strike could have triggered an investigation or financial penalties. But here's what really mattered. Lively knew this. By strategically never submitting her SAG-AFTRA paperwork, she left the production vulnerable, knowing they couldn't afford a compliance violation. This was yet another calculated move that gave her leverage over the film. Blake Lively's lack of a signed contract wasn't an accident. It was a catastrophic business affairs failure. Without a letter of engagement or a long-form performer contract, Wayfarer had no way to enforce her obligations. No financial penalties, no legal remedies, no way to force her to finish the film on their terms, promote it, or comply with Sony's creative direction. Lively flipped the power dynamic, withholding cooperation until her demands were met. She dictated post-production changes, replaced key personnel, and even gained final cut approval, all without ever signing the binding agreements. Wayfarer had no legal recourse. They had already paid her millions, and without a contract in place, Lively was free to operate entirely on her own terms. Meanwhile, Sony found itself in a dangerous position. Unlike Disney, Universal, or Warner Brothers, Sony doesn't have a built-in streaming service to fall back on. That means their entire business model relies on theatrical box office performance. For Sony, star-driven marketing isn't optional, it's survival. And that's exactly the leverage Lively used against them. If she walked away from the press tour, Sony wouldn't just be facing a PR nightmare, they'd be looking at a financial disaster. Without a contract binding her to promote the film, she could dictate the terms of her involvement. And knowing Sony had no fallback plan, that only strengthened her grip on the production as a whole. Lively wasn't just controlling the film's edit. She was controlling the studio itself. Wayfarer Studios entered It Ends With Us believing they had creative control, final cut, and legal protections in place as any production company in first position would. What actually happened was a masterclass in how power players manipulate a project out of a smaller company's hands without ever needing to break a contract. This was a cataclysmic mistake on Wayfarer's part, but it also raises some serious questions. Sony is a major studio with a full legal department. WME, one of the most powerful talent agencies in Hollywood, represented Lively, Baldoni, Wayfarer, and almost every other player on the film, except Isabella Ferrer. Between those two entities, Someone should have ensured that standard industry protocol was followed. So why didn't they? Was this sheer negligence? Two massive institutions dropping the ball on a smaller studio in such a spectacular way? Or was it something more? Because if Lively had planned from the start to take control, refusing to sign her contract would be the perfect way to do it. Wayfarer didn't realize how much leverage they had given her until it was too late. At first, Sony pushed back on Lively's growing influence, supporting their production partners and director. But Sony's resistance quickly crumbled. Instead of backing Baldoni and Wayfarer, Sony executives urged the studio to give in to Lively's demands at every turn. This was no longer Baldoni's film. It was Lively's. But Wayfarer didn't lose control all at once. They lost it through a series of cascading failures. They failed to enforce standard contract procedures, allowing Lively to work without a signed certificate of engagement or a long-form contract. They trusted William Morris and Sony to protect their interests, not realizing that both had financial incentives to prioritize Lively and her husband, Ryan Reynolds, lurking behind the scenes. And they failed to recognize how much leverage they had given her until it was too late to fight back. Had Wayfarer locked down contracts before filming began, Lively never would have been able to overrule Baldoni's creative vision, hold marketing hostage, or threaten to refuse press participation. Instead, they handed her the keys to the entire production. And once she had them, she never let go. This isn't just a story about a bad contract negotiation. It's a story about how the Hollywood machine works. Big stars with agency backing can override even contractual norms if they have the right leverage. And smaller, independent studios, they rarely stand a chance. Wayfarer Studios thought they had final cut and creative control. But in the end, Blake Lively had something far more powerful: control over the system itself. Lively didn't just push for the creative control, though. She wielded it like a weapon. When Baldoni and Wayfarer resisted her demands, she escalated. And when they still refused to cave, she set out to dismantle them entirely, leveling accusations that blindsided the production company. Upon the resolution of the industry strikes, Lively refused to return to set unless Wayfarer agreed to her non-negotiable, quote, protections for return to production, a document that, by its very language, implied misconduct had occurred. The irony: many of the protections she demanded were policies that had been in place since day one. Yet, under immense pressure to finish the film, Wayfarer had no real choice but to sign. But that document wasn't just about production safeguards. It became a Trojan horse. Lively used it to cement her control, ultimately securing her own cut of the film and systematically forcing Baldoni out, not just from creative decisions, but from all marketing and promotional efforts as well. The very cast members and the author with whom he had long-standing positive relationships, they were now aligned with her. And what no one realized at the time was that all of this, the power plays, the creative takeover, the strategic dismantling of Wayfarer's authority, wasn't just about control. It was about something even more valuable in Hollywood: the PGA Mark. One of the most explosive allegations in Baldoni and Wayfarer's countersuit is that Lively forced them to endorse her for a PGA Mark under duress. From the very start of negotiations, Lively pushed for a full producer credit. But there was one major issue. She didn't meet the professional requirements to qualify, so Wayfarer refused. Instead, she was granted an executive producer title, standard for high-profile actors who contribute to a project without handling the day-to-day responsibilities of a hands-on producer. The distinction is critical. An executive producer credit is often honorary, while the PGA Mark is a certification awarded only to those who actively fulfill the key production duties outlined by the Production Guild of America, or the PGA. The requirements are strict, and Wayfarer initially resisted because Lively had not been involved in the development or production planning of the film, two of the key eligibility criteria. But here's where it gets interesting. Lively didn't just want the producer credit, she wanted the PGA Mark, which is a designation that carries industry prestige and, more importantly, some seriously concrete benefits, including awards eligibility for things like the Oscars, BAFTAs, and the Golden Globes. They only recognize PGA certified producers for Best Picture nominations. Without it, an actor-producer is ineligible to personally receive an Oscar for Best Picture. Then there's the industry credibility. The mark distinguishes true producers from those given the title as a vanity credit. And negotiating power. A PGA mark cements an actor's credibility as a producer, justifying higher back-end deals and more control over future projects. It signifies that the PGA has vetted and certified that the individual was a true hands-on producer of a film. They weren't just a financier, an executive in name only, or someone who showed up for a few key meetings. It's a big deal because in an industry where credit inflation is rampant, believe me guys, it is from top to bottom, the PGA Mark tells studios, audiences, and awards bodies who actually put in the work. And when actors transition into producing, getting the PGA Mark is a major milestone. It signals they're not just attaching their name to a project, but are actively involved in making the film happen. Usually, it's when that actor's own production company also co-produces the film. Now, a couple of notable examples would be Brad Pitt. He'd been producing for years under his company Plan B Entertainment, but it wasn't until 12 Years a Slave where he first earned his PGA mark. Even though he only had a small acting role in the film, his real contribution was as the film's main hands-on producer. Or you have Margot Robbie, who got her first PGA mark on I, Tonya, where, yes, she starred, but she also produced it through her own company, Lucky Chap Entertainment. And this wasn't just a vanity credit. Robbie fought for the film to get made, she secured the financing, and was deeply involved in hiring the creative team. Earning a PGA mark as an actor-producer means that Hollywood sees you as a legitimate producer, not just an actor with a vanity credit. Now, here's the thing though. This wasn't new territory for Lively. The first time her husband, Ryan Reynolds, secured his own coveted PGA title? Deadpool 2, a film where, notably, the original director, Tim Miller, was removed, allowing Reynolds to assume a more dominant role and satisfy his own PGA certification requirements. Lively didn't just stumble into a power grab here. It was already orchestrated, with an established playbook right under her roof. By refusing to sign a long-form contract, she created the loophole that allowed her to systematically seize control. She knew exactly which boxes she needed to check for PGA eligibility and maneuvered herself into positions to do just that. Lively weaponized her star power and Sony's reliance on her box office draw to manufacture a producer role that never existed before she joined the film. And she wasn't just chasing a title. She was securing her future. The PGA mark isn't just an industry badge of honor. It's a strategic career move, allowing her to demand more power, better deals, and producer-level influence on all future projects. She didn't just take over the film. She rewrote the rules to make sure she'd never have to fight for power again. And now let's break down exactly how she did it. According to the Producers Guild of America bylaws, an actor-producer must meet strict criteria to qualify for the coveted PGA Mark. And the rules are explicit. Quote, in general, contributions to the actor's own character, marketing as an actor, and other creative input that is typical of an actor may not be counted toward the individual's producing duties if they also receive an actor credit. End quote. But instead, to obtain the mark, the individual must demonstrate that they personally made regular, continuous, and substantial decisions regarding production, budgetary, and legal concerns in a constructive and responsible manner. Now, Lively undeniably made regular and continuous decisions during production, but whether they were constructive and responsible is another question entirely. Take, for instance, the protections for return to production. She demanded post-strike. On the surface, the document was framed as an effort to ensure the safety and comfort of the entirety of the cast and crew. But in reality, many of the policies she insisted upon already existed, while others twisted minor pre-strike incidents into something far more sinister. Some, Baldoni and Wayfarer claim, were outright falsehoods. It was a power play, one that laid the groundwork for her eventual takeover. The most critical clause, the anti-retaliation provision. As discussed in our previous series, this clause effectively insulated her from pushback, allowing her to eliminate key players and reconfigure the production to serve her own interests. Any budgetary concerns? That was an entirely different story, one that was neither constructive nor responsible, but that we'll get to in a moment. To obtain a PGA mark, an actor-producer must prove substantial involvement in at least two of the three core production categories. In development, that could mean securing the rights, financing, hiring key creative talent. In production, making substantial creative contributions to pre-production and production beyond what is typical of an actor. And then post-production, overseeing editorial, music, and final cut decisions. Lively had no legitimate claims in development. She didn't secure the rights, the financing, hire the director, key department heads, or hell, even read the book itself. So that left her with only two paths forward: production and post-production. And she would check those boxes no matter what it took. A legitimate producer oversees scheduling, budget management, key creative hires, and production logistics. What Lively did, however, was leverage coercion and control to position herself as the film's de facto decision maker. While she didn't formally hold hiring power, Lively leveraged her influence to replace or remove multiple key personnel. The editors. Once she seized control of the cut, Lively brought in Shane Reed, an editor she previously worked with on Taylor Swift's I Bet You Think About Me music video, which Blake herself had directed, and who also edited Reynolds' Deadpool and Wolverine film. To accommodate her demand, Wayfarer and Baldoni were forced to fire the film's existing editors before their contract's end date. Then there was the composer. Late in post-production, Lively replaced the film's composer despite the fact that the score was nearly complete. This wasn't just a creative disruption, it ballooned the budget. Wayfarer had to not only cover overages for the new score, but also pay out the remaining contractual fees for the original composer. And then we have the first assistant director. 1 month into filming, Lively called Sony executives to express grievances about the first AD, suggesting they be replaced. However, 6 days prior, that same AD had disagreed with Lively's vision for the bar montage scene, siding with Baldoni on directorial choices. Shortly after Lively's complaint, both the first AD and the second AD, who was also a woman, were dismissed. Coincidence? Possibly, but the timing is hard to ignore. These weren't mere suggestions, they were ultimatums. Beyond hiring, Lively dictated creative decisions in ways that far exceeded the traditional influence of an actor. Daily script rewrites where Lively made ongoing script changes, not just for her own character, but also for Baldoni's character of Ryle, an overreach for someone without a writing credit. She was directing key scenes, giving control over certain intimate moments ostensibly to ensure her own comfort, but in reality, it further cemented her authority. Final approval on many aspects of the young Lily character. Her protections for return to production document demanded that she be given final say on certain creative decisions related to the younger version of her character. Again, something far beyond the typical scope of an actor. Then there's the wardrobe takeover. Even before production began, Lively asserted control over the costume department, refusing to participate in standard fittings and forcing the wardrobe team to reshop her entire look, causing major budget overages. In the end, Wayfarer ceded wardrobe approval to her entirely. While actors often have input in their character's aesthetic, full creative control over wardrobe is typically reserved for producers and directors, not to mention the costume department itself. On paper, all of this allowed her to check the production box, but she wasn't done yet. Then there was post-production, the final takeover. Under normal circumstances, a legitimate producer in post-production would oversee editing and ensure final cut approval, manage the score, the visual effects, and marketing strategy, negotiate distribution and promotional efforts. Lively's involvement in post-production, however, was not about constructive oversight. It was about seismic control. Lively didn't just want input, she wanted access. She demanded access to dailies, an early attempt to secure influence over the edit, and something actors rarely, if ever, are granted access to. 4 days into Baldoni's DGA-protected 10-week edit, she was already in the bay despite industry standard protections allowing directors time to lock their initial cut. Upon receiving a work-in-progress cut, she returned with 7 full pages of notes, a staggering amount of revisions for someone not contractually listed as a producer or director. But she wasn't just giving feedback. She was setting the stage for a full takeover. Under the threat of refusing to promote the film, Lively leveraged her way deeper into the edit. First, she was granted solo time in the edit bay and handpicked an editor in Shane Reed. She also had one of the film's existing editors flown from LA to New York to sit with her. Wayfarer initially agreed to 10 days of this, but Lively ignored repeated requests to sign her contract while simultaneously leveraging extended edit time. The result? She took not 10, but 20 days, and ultimately, she didn't just get an alternate cut of the film, she got the final cut. And that changed everything. With editorial control in hand, Lively expanded her influence to marketing and promotional strategy, a category that directly contributes to PGA eligibility. She personally secured Taylor Swift's My Tears Ricochet for the trailer and film, a massive get for Sony, but one she also used as leverage to solidify her influence over Final Cut. Despite Baldoni's version of the film testing better with audiences, her cut was strong-armed into theaters instead, despite an agreement that she would abandon her version if it underperformed. She reneged. She dictated the credits on marketing materials, removed Baldoni's name next to hers, removed his A Film By credit, removed his likeness from key promotional assets. Again, the threat? If they didn't comply, she wouldn't promote. Now, as a side note, Baldoni, who had signed his contract, legally negotiated and secured those credits. Sony was forced to go back to him for approval in writing in order to remove them and adhere to Lively's demands, which ultimately he had to concede to get the film made. And it didn't stop there. She had final approval over trailers, TV spots, and digital marketing assets. She demanded the domestic poster match the book cover with herself alone on it. She organized a key marketing event through Ryan Reynolds' company Maximum Effort without Sony or Wayfarer's approval and outside the budget. She orchestrated cast content shoots but excluded Baldoni, a lead in the film. And then, just 2 weeks before the film's world premiere, at the exact moment when press and promotional participation was most crucial, she finally went for her PGA mark. By this point, Lively had everything she needed to argue for the PGA certification. But there was one last obstacle. She needed official producer endorsement from Baldoni and Wayfarer's CEO, Jamie Heath. They resisted, so she escalated. On June 18, 2024, Wayfarer agreed to a producer credit, upgrading her from the previously agreed upon executive producer title, but refused to advocate for the PGA mark. Lively bypassed them, went directly to Sony, pressured the studio to intervene despite this being a Wayfarer decision. Wayfarer stood firm, telling Sony that they would not endorse her PGA mark to the Guild. But merely 2 days later, on June 20th, Lively again contacted Sony, this time demanding Baldoni and Heath personally write her a letter of recommendation for PGA certification. Sony informed Heath that Lively was furious with their refusal, and Lively allegedly told Sony that because of this, quote, any goodwill left was now gone, end quote. 5 days later, on June 25th, after repeated threats, Wayfarer's CEO ultimately caved. Heath reached out personally in an attempt to smooth things over, but Lively refused to take his call. With millions of dollars on the line and Wayfarer's partnership with Sony hanging on by a thread, they reluctantly wrote the letter. 1 day later, June 26, 2024, Baldoni and Heath sent Lively the endorsement letter to submit to the Producers Guild of America. However, simultaneously, they emailed Wayfarer's attorneys, documenting that the letter was written under extreme pressure, even going so far as to call it extortion, a last-ditch effort to protect themselves legally down the line. At that moment, the blood was shed. Blake Lively had won. She had forced Wayfarer, the very company that fought against her credit, to validate her claim as a producer, and with that letter, her PGA mark was secured. Now, to an outsider, with no firsthand knowledge of what was happening behind the scenes, could Lively's contributions appear substantial enough to meet the PGA's criteria? Absolutely, especially with an official endorsement letter from the other PGA certified producers on the film. But if Baldoni and Wayfarer's counterclaim is accurate, what actually happened wasn't about meeting the PGA standards. It was about manipulating them. This was not an accident. Lively reverse engineered her way into a producer credit, systematically checking every required box regardless of the damage to production. She seized control of production by eliminating key personnel and overriding the director's authority. She took over post-production by forcing her way into the edit, replacing the composer, the editor, and dictating the marketing strategy. And when she needed the final stamp of approval, she threatened and pressured Wayfarer into submission. This wasn't about creative passion. This was about power. Blake Lively didn't just earn her PGA mark, she stole it. And the industry, they let her. Lively hadn't just seized creative control of It Ends With Us. She also dramatically driven up costs, forcing Wayfarer and Sony to absorb millions in unbudgeted expenses. Her influence extended far beyond the scope of an actor or even a producer. She treated the film's budget as an unlimited checkbook, funding her personal preferences, creative whims, and power plays at the studio's expense. The first major cost spike came before cameras even started rolling. The line producer, the person directly responsible for managing the film's budget, repeatedly raised concerns over Lively's excessive wardrobe expenses. According to internal emails, the wardrobe budget was originally set at $185,000, but the expected final spend was around $500K, a reasonable number given that much of the wardrobe would be returned after filming, as is very standard in the industry. Over a week before filming began, the line producer reported that the wardrobe budget had already hit $615,000 on a $30 million budget just from shopping for Lively and Baldoni's characters alone. The cause? Lively's takeover of wardrobe, last-minute reshopping, and refusal to attend standard fittings, forcing the department to bring wardrobe selections to her apartment. But this was only the beginning. On June 12, 2023, production was unexpectedly shut down for a day after WGA strikers picketed the set. In the wake of the picketers, SAG and the WGA approved the film to continue production. Wayfarer wanted to proceed as scheduled. Lively, however, refused, having already left the country to join her husband in London. That one decision threw the entire schedule into chaos. With Lively refusing to shoot, Wayfarer was forced to rework the entire production schedule at enormous expense. Having worked on features myself, I know the scope that this plays into and how much would have had to be changed last minute. That required relocating to new shooting locations, obtaining last-minute permits to film there, and rearranging travel and accommodations for cast and crew, none of which was budgeted. They, in fact, even shifted focus to scenes featuring the younger versions of the characters who had yet to film and hadn't been on the schedule for another several weeks. When Lively reached the final day of her approved editing window, she made yet another unilateral decision, one that added even more unplanned costs to production. Instead of turning over her cut to the director and studio, she refused, telling Sony she wanted to hold a, quote, friends and family screening of her version before making any final decisions. This meant continuing to work on her edit at Sony and Wayfarer's expense, despite no budget allocation for the additional editing time, not to mention an unplanned or unscheduled screening event. Lively had claimed in a January 2023 text to Baldoni that Ryan Reynolds' company, Maximum Effort, would, quote, work free for the family, like the mafia, end quote. Well, that didn't happen. Sony ultimately hired Maximum Effort to produce the film's promotional content, but the cost far exceeded the original marketing budget. And to make matters worse, Sony was denied direct access to the footage they had paid for through Maximum Effort. Perhaps one of the most egregious financial decisions was Lively's unilateral replacement of the film's original award-winning composer after he had already completed the score. His work had included costly orchestral arrangements, which had already been recorded. Replacing him meant paying out his full contract and covering the steep costs of hiring a new composer late in the post-production process. Neither Sony nor Wayfarer had the ability to challenge her decision, despite the enormous financial repercussions. Lively replaced the film's editors with her own choice, an editor frequently used by she and Reynolds. This meant letting go of the original editors, forcing Wayfarer to pay out their contracts while also covering the costs of Lively's new hire, which was not inexpensive. Before she removed them completely, she made Sony pay for one of the existing editors to fly to New York and stay there to work with her. Another unbudgeted expense. Wayfarer and Sony were then forced to cover the costs of Lively's extravagant premiere party, one that they weren't even welcomed at. When Wayfarer realized they were locked out of the event, they had to fund a second, separate premiere gathering for themselves. And while their event was far smaller, without a bar, it was still an unbudgeted expense, while Lively's event ran over budget. Standard industry practice calls for 1 or 2 test screenings to gauge audience reception. They're called focus groups, and they're used to measure a test audience of usually around 100 people's reception to a film. There are marks for different demographics, different age groups, male versus female, co-viewing, and you vote excellent, very good, good, or poor. The higher the mark in the excellent, very good, the better the reception. Well, Baldoni's version scored higher across the board. Lively didn't just bulldoze her way into producer credit. She did it while violating major industry norms and potentially breaking guild rules. Now, with all of this publicly exposed, the question is, will there be consequences? Could she lose her PGA mark as a result of all of this? The mark is not guaranteed permanent. If it is determined that Lively fraudulently obtained the certification, the Producers Guild of America could very well revoke it. With official documentation from Baldoni and Wayfarer outlining the alleged coercion, the PGA could launch an internal review, and those potential repercussions could be sprawling. And another question, could Lively face repercussions from other guilds? Well, let's look at SAG-AFTRA. Lively held her contracts and start paperwork hostage to gain leverage over the production. Could the union view this as a violation of labor guidelines? And the DGA. By violating Baldoni's DGA-protected 10-week edit, Lively directly undermined the Directors Guild standards, a move that could lead to formal complaints. And then there's the WGA itself. And the biggest wild card is Reynolds' alleged strike breaking. Lively publicly revealed on the red carpet that Reynolds had rewritten significant scenes of the script. They publicly admit that they both knew what they were doing, and it could be a major issue if it did in fact happen during the WGA strike. If the timing lines up, Reynolds could have very well put not only his own standing in the Writers Guild in jeopardy, but he also could have put Lively's future standings or current standings with the guilds such as the PGA and WGA herself. One film, 4 major guilds, unprecedented fallout. This one single film, Lively and Reynolds managed to put themselves in precarious positions with all 4 of Hollywood's most powerful unions and guilds. With the PGA for allegedly coercing her way into a fraudulent producer credit and PGA Mark. With SAG for leveraging contracts as a power play and not involving her guild when the timing mattered the most. The DGA for violating a director's protected editing period, a sacred guild rule and regulation. And then the WGA for potentially exposing Reynolds himself to a strike-breaking scandal that could kick him out of the guild forever. And the biggest question of all, will Hollywood actually hold them accountable? Because if the industry lets this slide, it sends a very clear message that star power trumps the rules. But if they don't, well, then Lively's calculated move to seize power may have just cost her everything. And soon to come in our following episodes, we'll be breaking down this new age of Hollywood where lawsuits are the new publicly wielded PR weapons. How prestige press may have been manipulated as proxies, and how a legal battleground may lay the foundation of where Hollywood as a whole is headed. And the landscape, it'll never be the same. Thanks for joining, guys. And if you like what you hear, please donate a cocktail or subscribe. There's a lot of work that goes into doing these investigative reports, and, well, frankly, it becomes a full-time job. So if you enjoyed it, recommend to friends, leave us a 5-star rating or review, and donate a cocktail or sign up for our subscriptions. You will not be disappointed. Thanks for everything, guys, and until next time, see you later.